We're going to jump in to our last topic, which is opening the door on Pesach, which has certain valences both at the beginning and the end of the Seder. So in terms of opening the door at the beginning of the Seder, we have this invitation, of course, Ha Lahma Anya, Kol dichfin yete v'yechol. Anybody who is in need should come and eat, which really only makes sense as an actual invitation if you open the door. Meaning if you're just saying in your closed, huddled group, anybody who wants to join us is welcome, but you can't see or hear anybody outside of whoever's there. It seems like it's just sort of a saying as opposed to an actual offer. So let's see how the offer was constructed. This is not in the context of Pesach per se, but this is in one of the great stories of Rav Huna, one of the early Amoraim, one of the early rabbis in the Talmud. We get the following statement. Rav from Bar Papa says to Rava, say some of the wonderful things that Rav Huna used to do. And indeed, Rava lists out a number of amazing things that Rav Huna used to do, including when he would eat bread. He have a karech rifta, and here you see korech is the sandwich, the Hillel sandwich we spoke about earlier this week. But this is just normal wrapping up of a bread, i.e. you're making your lafa as a sign of you're having a meal. He would open up his gate and say, Kol man detzarich leite v'lechol. Whoever needs, come in and eat, which really is the inspiration for our text in Ha Lahma Anya, Kol dichfin yete v'yechol. And again, that's only in the Babylonian Haggadah. That's not in Eretz Yisrael, and the Talmud doesn't say to mention this at the beginning of the Seder. But you can see how this might have derived from this practice of Rav Huna. Rava says about all these wonderful things that Rav Huna used to do. He said, well, all of the great things I listed, which I just put in ellipses, I can also do, except for this one. Because there are so many hungry soldiers in Machoza. Rava's in the largest city at the time in Bavel. And he's saying, I just can't open my door and invite everybody to eat. There's too many people who would come. And Rashi actually tells us that it's not really that the soldiers per se, but that there are too many poor people, Dika Aniyetzve, and they would eat up all the principal. Like, how much can I really offer people if when I did open my doors, everybody would tumble through, and I would be left with no food at all, presumably. But apparently Rav Huna was doing that, and it was not a ritual offer. It was a real offer, and he would invite other people to eat with him. So that's sort of the idea of opening your home and inviting people to eat, or the act of opening your door before a meal indicates I'm inviting people to come in and eat. This custom gets modified after the Talmud. First of all, it gets added to Seder night. It's not just for the people who can invite people to eat every day. That's what Rav Huna's practice was. But we're sort of transferring this to the Seder, which has a very strong understanding that poor people need to be able to have 4 cups of wine. So there's sort of this making sure that everybody has the foods that they need for Pesach. And we get the following statement from Matityahu Gaon, who's post-Talmudic in the 9th century, who says, it's our custom to say, Kol dichfin yete v'yechol. That's what we know from Ha Lahma Anya. Whoever is in need, come and eat. This was the custom of our ancestors, he reports, who would raise their tables and not close their doors, and would say this so that the poor in Israel among them should come and eat, and they would do this to receive a reward. There was a strong sense in the Talmud that feeding the poor also benefits the person who's feeding the poor. So we have here a testimony to an older custom that already in the mid-9th century he's gonna modify a little bit based on the circumstances. But you can see, what does it mean to have Pesach? It means you open your door. That's what it means, and you invite people to eat with the doors open. But then he's sort of looking around at his actual neighbors, says, now that our neighbors are non-Jews, even more than Jews, we feed the poor in advance in order that they not need to knock on the doors, right? So Rav Matityahu is saying, I still want to make sure that the poor Jews who need their food on Seder night are getting their food. I'm not going to do it by opening my door and making a general announcement. Like, they may not hear it. There's other people walking around who it's not applicable to. But we nevertheless need to feed people. And so we make sure to feed them in advance and that's really our obligation. So indeed, when we say, Kol dichmin yetei v'yechol, whoever is in need, come and eat, we presumably have already made sure that they have what they need to eat. And then it does turn into sort of a ritual invitation, not a real invitation, but it doesn't mean you've ignored the need and you've just taken care of that in advance. But again, looking at the old custom, that you would have the lo hayu sogrim dal toteim. They would not have closed their doors. You can imagine what would it look like to have the entire, not just for one moment at the beginning of Magid, you open your door, announce anybody who's hungry, come and eat, and close your door, but rather the whole night is actually spent with the door open, which is not how we experience it today. Now we experience it more connected to the end of the Seder with Eliyahu and Navi, and that's what I want to look at now. But just to note, the idea of opening your door at the Seder could have been just an open door Seder for the entire time, and not just for one moment at the beginning or at the end. So in terms of inviting Eliyahu, which we have at the end of the Seder, and opening the door for Elijah, the earliest testimony that I saw around this in scholarship was Maaseh Rokeach. Those are worms in the turn of the 13th century. He says, I found in a scroll written by our great rabbi that his father wouldn't, meaning the Rokeach, the Rebbe Yehuda Chassid, who's sort of the founder of the German pietists, that his father wouldn't close the doors of the house in which we were sitting at all from the beginning until now. Okay, again, you have this custom which gets modified by Reb Matityahu in the mid-9th century, but a couple centuries later in Germany, there's a great rabbi. His father was keeping the door open all night long for Seder, so the custom sort of survives of keeping the doors open. And this is our custom, that the doors of the house should remain open, so that when Eliyahu comes, we will speedily go out to meet him without any delay. Right? Actually, it's not Elijah coming into our Seder to drink Elijah's cup and then leave like, a sort of proto Santa Claus and go to the next Seder, but rather there's this idea of Elijah's coming because tonight is the night of redemption, and we are going through the door to greet Elijah outside, as presumably everybody is, because he's the herald of redemption. And the Rokeach connects this to the tradition that Pesach is not just a report of the past. It's not just a story from long ago about how we once were redeemed from Egypt, but rather it's also a story in which we are about to get redeemed again. Because as we read in the Talmud, the Pesach Atidin Ligael, in the future we will be redeemed on Pesach, and it's not just in the past we were redeemed on Pesach. That this is in the debate about whether these major events happen in Nisan or in Tishrei, but Nisan is the time of redemption of the future and not just the marking of a past redemption. And then also he quotes this verse, which is very important to the idea of opening the door on Seder night, which is Leil Shimurim Hu L'Adonai. This is a night of Shimurim, which is a little bit hard to translate. It seems to come from the word Bishmor, to watch or to guard. So this is a night of watching for Hashem, where either we are guarding, meaning we are doing things very carefully, like matzah shmura, that kind of idea of watching, guarding, keeping the mitzvot, lishmor mitzvot, or maybe it means that God is watching us and protecting us, and we are guarded in some way tonight more than other nights, which would allow us to open the door, even in a context in which we normally wouldn't open the door. And he goes on and says, this is a leil hamishumar. This is a guarded night already from the beginning of creation. And so then he says, remember, my students, this warns us not to lock the doors because of the faith in the word of the Holy Blessed. And through this faith, we'll be rewarded by being redeemed in the future. So there's some connection of, it's not just utilitarian. I'm opening the door in order to greet Elijah, or I'm opening the door in order to feed hungry people. That's part of it. But also the idea of an open door also expresses my faith in the coming redemption. And that itself can be significant and sort of a model of what I think this night is going to portend and not just commemorate. So there's this really powerful idea of the open door as dealing with the people in front of me today, but also as I'm ready to rush through that door to greet the redemption, which is right around the corner on Pesach. In terms of the Elijah's cup, this is a much later tradition that gets reported first time in the 15th century, It seems separate from the opening of the door. And we got a Reb Zelwin Bingba, a student of the Maharil, who was a famous German rabbi in the 15th century, says, I've seen that some people on the eve of Pesach pour a special cup and place it on the table and say, Zeh kos le'Eliyahu hanavi. This is the cup of Elijah the prophet. And we don't necessarily see it connected to the end of the Seder. It's just one of the things that's on the Seder table itself. And a little bit later, a couple centuries later, we also have another report of this custom that we don't. We don't now in the 1700s in Prague and Germany. We don't now open up the door because there's bad stuff outside. There's ganavim, there's robbers, like people are going to rush through the door and harm us in some ways. But nevertheless, there is this custom in these lands to pour another cup, more than the people at the meal, and call it the cup of Elijah the prophet. So that's where the cup of Elijah actually replaces the open door, at least in this telling. And so we used to open the door. Now we don't because it's dangerous to do so. But in sort of to commemorate the coming of the redemption tonight and not just a report of the past, we're going to put a cup of Elijah on the table, which is sort of a safer way of having that door open all night long so that we can rush through and greet Elijah in the moment of redemption. Okay, so that's a little bit about the opening of the door, keeping that door open. We appreciate it, and it's really a joy to be able to learn with everybody.